My name is Jamie Lee. I am the Shelter Insurance Business Agency owner, and this is Sarah's story. My story starts early. My mother and father were middle school best friends. My mother grew up in a single income home with a hardworking mother and an alcoholic father. My father's parents partied, did drugs, and sold drugs. My father and his siblings were often left at home alone for long periods of time. His parents were verbally and emotionally abusive to each other. My father watched the mental abuse his entire life and didn't have a positive role model anywhere around him. He met my mother and went on to have their first child as a teenager and dropped out of school. My parents quickly became just like their own parents. My mom became the victim of a vicious mental abuse cycle, and my dad the vicious drug cycle. Both thinking that that's how life is supposed to be. I remember my mother not being allowed to wear makeup. She wasn't even allowed to cut her hair. Me and my sisters weren't even allowed to have haircuts. It was all a sick control game that was a family heirloom. My mom finally decided she didn't want her children to see this lifestyle. So that had to mean she was cheating, right? My father ruined every piece of clothing, vehicle, and anything that meant anything to her. We were homeless, staying with family. He ended up going deeper into drugs and would run my mother off the road knowing his children were in the car every chance he got. I was going to kindergarten every morning, fearing every time my mom dropped me off to my dad, he was going to hurt her. I started developing a wall of anger and being closed off, not focused on the things a normal kid would focus on. Once my dad was arrested for stalking my mom. I remember vividly my grandparents taking my dad to a rehab facility, pulling over every 3 minutes for him to take a hit off a pipe. Their excuse now is at least we didn't let him do it in the car with you. Into adulthood, I would speak to some of my family about how much trauma I had endured throughout my childhood. They would always somehow make it all my mother's fault. My mom worked 3 jobs to raise us. I saw how tired mentally and physically she was, so I didn't want to bother her. I wanted to snap my fingers and to see my mom happy. I wanted her to heal from all the abuse she encountered. My entire life was surrounded by abuse, and in my mind, I would never fall victim to anything or anyone. I met what I thought was my knight in shining armor at 16. We often talked about our childhoods, which were similar, and both of us desperately wanting better. His family abuse was still happening. I was so confident he would be different. He ended up in jail at 18 for hurting a neighbor. He was ordered to do anger management. I thought it helped, but before I knew it, I wore makeup, I was cheating. His family even victimized me for if I told them I did something wrong. I worked 12 to 16 hours a day to pay our bills. He worked whenever he wanted to supply his pill addiction. He would wake up so exhausted, body up, from working and taking care of the house all hours of the night, to argue with my phone in his hand saying I deleted messages and that I was talking to other guys. If I got stopped by a train on my way home from work, I knew I was in trouble. I was only 19 years old. If I had to stay over for work, I was staring at the clock, knowing what I was in for when I got home. I was running on empty all the time. I felt no joy in life. I was exhausted all the time. Why has my whole life been full of anger and sadness? I need to get out. I tried to leave. He held a knife to me, telling me I was a whore, ugly, fat, and no one wanted me, not even my own father. I finally escaped. I stayed away from him for weeks, only to find myself right back with him being changed. Every time, it was the same lines. One day, I took a pregnancy test and it was positive. I quickly panicked. There was no way I could bring a child into this. I will gather up money and leave state. I didn't care if that meant being alone for the rest of my life, as long as my child didn't have to be a victim. He knew I was planning on leaving. He came into my room while I was asleep, began beating me with his belt in places. He knew no one would see, that I could hide. He was ripping my hair out from my head. The only thing I could think was to scream, "Stop, I'm pregnant." But the beating continued. I went to work the next day. I was very good at hiding what happened hours earlier. The police were involved, so I thought, okay, he's going to leave me alone. I would see signs that he had left on my vehicle showing me he was still watching me. The police thought I was being paranoid and didn't take me seriously. When you call them because there's a bottle of pop by your car, he drank that kind of pop, and I wanted to know he wanted me to know he was watching me. I knew he was watching me. He finally left me alone after nearly a year of stalking me. Today, I have an amazing man in my life, and we have a beautiful son. I think continuing to spread awareness that there's people out there that want to help, because I think people that are victims try to hide it. They don't want to burden anyone else, and there's people out there that really want to help them.